My name is Nicolas Arquilo. I will give a short presentation on the necessity of eco-anxiety. I will argue that eco-anxiety is a necessary precondition for environmental hope, which can then allow us to properly navigate climate change crisis. The American Psychological Association defines eco-anxiety as a chronic fear of environmental doom. This fear can be motivated in the perception that climate change will negatively impact one's future, the future of the world, or even future generations. I will now discuss some quantitative data that demonstrates the phenomenon of eco-anxiety, especially among young people. In a 2021 survey across 10 different countries and 10,000 young people, 45% felt that climate change had an impact on normal functioning, 27% were extremely worried, and 32% were very worried about climate change. In the same survey, they were inquired about their emotions. Most of them were negative, sad, afraid, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless. Notice how only a minority of young people reported optimism or even indifference. Finally, when asked about their negative beliefs, a vast majority of young people reported that people have failed, and because of this, the future is frightening, humanity is doomed, and the things they value are destroyed. These data show that there is a clear junction between hope and despair in deciding which should be the best route to effectuate meaningful climate change action. For the purposes of this presentation, I will assume that human action that positively alters the environment is desirable. This is a common despair argument. Humanity has no hope of preventing climate apocalypse, so we should give up trying to solve it and accept and adapt to that fate. This argument has two problems. First, it is absolutist. No hope, there is no hope. At least in the context of climate change, this is wrong because we as humans only have predictions about the future of climate change. We can't really tell for certain whether there is hope. Second, this argument has very negative implications. Instead of action, this argument for despair can only motivate apathy, quietism, doing nothing, inactivity, eventually death. Ultimately, the argument motivates nothing. An analogous argument for hope is as follows: despair is always psychologically harmful and never motivates meaningful action. Thus, it should always be avoided. As the previous argument, this argument can also be absolutist. However, there is a case for despair, and that is what British professor James Bendel in his 2018 article Deep Adaptation did. And I will give you a quote of said article. Bendel said, well, Bendel wrote, the loss of a capability, a loved one, a way of life, or receipt of a terminal diagnosis have all been reported or personally experienced as a trigger for a new way of perceiving the self and the world, with hopelessness and despair being a necessary step in the process. This means that despair can be beneficial, it can effectuate positive action because it motivates self-development, self-evaluation, and self-growth. Similarly, David Montgomery, in his 2021 article In Search of Environmental Hope, supported the case for despair in the context of climate change. First, Montgomery dispelled the notion that hope always generates movement and fear always generates paralysis. Montgomery explained that in fact hope can be quite comforting. The comforts generates a feel of safety, and when there is safety, or at least the feeling of it, one is not motivated to do anything. But when there is fear, there is despair, there is anxiety, there is a feeling that something must change. And when that feeling arises, action arises. Montgomery also explained cautious optimism, that one should always be aware that human progress is being made and can be made to positively alter the environment. However, we should always remain skeptical because there is a lack of knowledge of results of one's actions. So, when one looks at climate change, there are two competing moral theories. On one hand, we have consequentialism, the moral theory that focuses on the results of actions. On the other hand, we have deontology, the moral theory that moves away from the importance of results and focuses on duties and obligations. So let's try consequentialism. First, if hope is only substantiated by the results, and the results are not as expected, hope will appear completely meaningless. But there is also an epistemological problem, a problem about knowledge. Climate change is so complicated and happens over such a long span of time that we may not even know the consequences of our actions in our lifetimes. For these two reasons, one should choose deontology, trying to effectuate meaningful climate change action, even if we don't know the results, and even if the results are not as expected, because it is the right thing to do. Finally, as a possible solution to this problem, we should allow grief into the process of eco anxiety because grief leads to healing, and when one heals despair, hope can take its place. Thank you for your time and attention. I highly recommend you check the sources I used for this presentation.